of the fantasy football season. And here's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking for this week. The first guy, Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens. So Justin Tucker, another great season it's been for him. No doubt about it here. In the last 2 out of 3 ball games, he's had double-digit fantasy games. Week 9 versus Minnesota, 10 fantasy points. Week 10 at Miami, 5. And Week 11 at Chicago, 10 fantasy points. I know this week it's a tough matchup on paper for Justin Tucker versus the Cleveland Browns. That give up the second least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season. But I think in this ball game, Tucker's going to find the uprights a few times. Lamar Jackson's going to be back. Hollywood Brown might be back as well. And I just like it here on Sunday Night Football. Good atmosphere. Ravens are at home. And I think Tucker has a good game. And the best one out of the kickers this week, the second kicker, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So last week was the worst career game for Tyler Bass, missing a bunch of field goals and only having 1 fantasy point. But I know it was rainy. I know it was windy. And it was just a weird game in general that the Bills got blown out 41-15 versus the Indianapolis Colts. So the last few games here for Bass, Week 8 versus Miami, 10. Week 9 at Jacksonville, 6. Week 10 at the Jets, 8. And Week 11 versus Indianapolis, 1. But right here on Thursday Night Football on Thanksgiving, I think he has a good ball game and bounces back at the New Orleans Saints after getting embarrassed by the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, nationally televised game, Thursday Night Football, Thanksgiving Day. And I think Bass indoors is going to do damage in this one. It wouldn't surprise me to see him hit 250-yarders in this one. The third kicker I got this week's Greg Zerline of the Dallas Cowboys. So Greg the Leg, he came back last week with a vengeance after missing the last couple games here. And he had 10 fantasy points in that one. So right here on Thanksgiving Day, 4:30 ball game versus the Vegas Raiders. And the Cowboys, they're going to be most likely out with CeeDee Lamb. And we know Amari Cooper's out as well, already ruled out for this game. But anyway, the Cowboys, no matter what, they're going to get in the red zone a few times in this game, either settling for field goals or kicking extra points or even putting up a 30-burger. We don't know what type of offense Dallas is going to show up. But we know they get the ball down the field. We know they get in field goal position most of the ball game. And right here this week, I think Greg the Leg has another great game, and I think he'll get 8 to 10 fantasy points at least. Number 4, Nick Folk of the New England Patriots. So it's been a great season here for Nick Folk, and he's been one of the best kickers, if not the best kicker, in all of fantasy football this year. The last few weeks for him, Week 9 at the Panthers, 6 fantasy points. Week 10 versus the Browns, 9. Week 11 in Atlanta, 14. And this week here at Sunday versus the Tennessee Titans, I think he has a good ball game once again in Week 12. I know the Titans give up the 9th least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season. But right here, I think Nick Folk in this one gets things going once again. He's getting double digits. In this Patriot offense, they don't punch the ball into the end zone where they got to settle for a lot of field goals. And I think once again, Folk in this one, minimum, will get 8 fantasy points. The 5th kicker, Greg Joseph, so the Vikings. So Greg Joseph, he's been one of the best kickers this season as well for fantasy football owners. And he's a guy where his floor is 7 points, it seems like. The last few weeks here for Joseph, Week 8 versus Dallas, 11. Week 9 at Baltimore, 7. Week 10 at the Chargers, 10. Week 11 versus Green Bay, 7. So right here, Week 12 at the 49ers, I say anywhere from 7 to 12 fantasy points is easily reachable here for Joseph. He plays in a great offense, obviously, with the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to get many opportunities in the red zone or in the end zone with extra points. And he's got one of the best boots in the league as well from 50-plus yards. So I think this week here, once again, at least 7 fantasy points, but it wouldn't surprise me if he hits double digits this week. The next kicker, number 6, Brandon Mcmanus of the Denver Broncos. So Brandon Mcmanus and the Broncos coming off the bye week. And they got a great matchup versus the Chargers that give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. I know Mcmanus the last few weeks hasn't done much. Week 7 at Cleveland, 2. Week 8 versus Washington, 6. Week 9 at Dallas, 10. And Week 10 versus Philly, 5. So right here on Week 12, it's a home game. He kicks better at home, is Mcmanus. And I think in this one, he'll have a good fantasy day. And it wouldn't surprise me to see one of the top scorers this week, number 7, Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers. So Robbie Gould, he's been good since he came back from injury here the last few games. Week 9 versus Arizona, 4. Week 10 versus the Rams, 9. And Week 11 at Jacksonville, 13. So right here, another great matchup for Robbie Gould versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And right here, he's going to have many opportunities. I think this game with the Niners and the Vikings is going to be a shootout. And we've seen a lot of shootouts this season with the Minnesota Vikings involved. So right here, I think Robbie Gould once again has a good ball game, and he's a guy you could be very confident in playing this week. Number 8, Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Daniel Carlson, he's been back to being pretty decent over the last few weeks here. Week 9 at the Giants 8, Week 10 versus the Chiefs 2, Week 11 versus Cincinnati 7, and Week 12 here, he's got a good matchup at the Dallas Cowboys that give up the 14th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And the Raiders, they're just a weird offense. You don't know if they're going to score a lot of touchdowns, or you don't know if they're going to settle like they did last week, only scoring 13 points versus Cincinnati. But right here, this Cowboy defense is a bend but don't break type of D. So I definitely could see Carlson lining up for 2 or 3 field goals in this one. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him have another good game, anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points this week. Number 9, Ryan Suckup of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Ryan Suckup on one of the best offenses in all of pro football this season. Now last week he had one of the best games of the season for him in Week 11 versus the Giants, 12 fantasy points. But before that, he was slumping a little. Week 8 at the Saints 3, Week 10 at Washington 4, and then like I mentioned, 12 versus the Giants. But right here in Week 12, it's a tough matchup in Indianapolis, no doubt about it. They give up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season, but he's in a top offense. I think Brady and the Bucs are straightening things out now after 2 bad losses at New Orleans and at the Washington football team, and they got back on track in Week 11, and I think they're going to be in the red zone early and often in this game. So I think Suckup in this game has another good ball game, and I like him at number 9 this week. Number 10, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Boswell, over the last 3 weeks here, he's really emerged as one of the better kickers in fantasy football in that time. Week 9 versus the Bears 14, Week 10 versus Detroit 10, Week 11 at the Chargers 14, and Week 12 here at Cincinnati. It's another good matchup. The Bengals here, their defense some days play well and some days give up a lot of touchdowns, but the way Boswell's kicked and the accuracy as well, he's been a good kicker, no doubt about it. And this week at Cincinnati, I see him put in a top 10 performance, and he's a guy you definitely could start with confidence. And he's also available still in 36% of fantasy leagues. Number 11, Michael Badry of the Indianapolis Colts. So Badry, he's having a great season since he filled in for Rodrigo Blankenship since Week 6 of the season. So the last few weeks here for Badry, Week 9 versus the Jets 9, Week 10 versus Jacksonville 9, and Week 11 at Buffalo 11. So right here, this Colt offense, one of the best offenses over the last few weeks of the season. And obviously that has to do a lot with Jonathan Taylor, who's been on a monster pace this season and one of the best running backs in all of pro football carrying this offense. And also the fact that Carson Wentz, he isn't turning the ball over as much as he did in his Philadelphia Eagle days. So right here, Badry, one of the best kickers over the last month of the season in fantasy football. And it's surprising to me he's still available right now, is Badry in 63% of fantasy leagues. So right here this week versus a tough Tampa Bay team, I still think he has a good ball game, and his floor for scoring is usually 7 fantasy points. I think he'll get something in that range, and the 12th and final kicker I'm ranking this week's Matt Gaye of the Los Angeles Rams. So Matt Gaye here, we know he's been a pretty accurate kicker this season, but I'm just going off the matchup, and it's a very tough one this week here versus the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. They give up the least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season. And the last few weeks here for Gaye, Week 8 at Houston 7, Week 9 versus the Titans 11, Week 10 at the Niners 4, and right here this week we'll see what he could do. I still think he has a good fantasy day, but a lot of good kicking options this week, and some of these guys are widely available as well on some waiver wire. So right here, wouldn't surprise me to see Gaye get double digits, but I'm just going off the matchup here and the last couple weeks not having great ball games. So that's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking here heading into Week 12 of the fantasy football season.